afternoon, welcome to UK Column News. It is the 1st of July 2014 and it's just gone 1 o'clock. We are back in the studio today. It's a nice day as well. We could have been outside, really.
We could have been outside. We could have been by the seaside, but the time had come to get back in the studio, and I think what we're going to be able to show people today is really the power of producing stuff in a professional way. But if you do that and you currently live in the United Kingdom, then you're going to have one of the government's agencies at VOD after you. But more on all that in due course. So reports coming in from across the country are generally sunny with some cloud.
Yep.
But most people seem pretty happy. We'll soon put a stop to that. Thanks for joining us.
You're off first, I think.
Well, yes, let's remind people of Robert Greene. So what are the facts? Well, here we are. Robert Greene was imprisoned by Alex Salmond's Scottish junta for 3 months and 1 week. He's now spent 41 days under house arrest in Warrington, and he is still unaware of the precise charges against him. So welcome to the encroaching dictatorship in Scotland and certainly in England. And let's remind ourselves of what Robert Greene's crime was. Well, trying to protect children from paedophiles in the establishment. And we will not leave this subject because no other subject exposes the pitiful state of British government at the moment. We're not just dealing with criminals in power. We're not just dealing with MPs having secret meetings with the corrupt international banks. At the moment, it's blatantly obvious that senior figures in Westminster are desperate to protect paedophiles who are operating at the highest levels of politics and within the wider establishment. So if that's what's happening at Westminster, we've got some interesting things happening at a lower level with the family courts.
Yeah, we do. Finally, actually, a judge and a barrister have admitted that social services act unlawfully. Judge Gareth Jones said that social services are not above the law. This attack has come after a mother from Anglesey area had her 9-year-old son taken into temporary foster care while she received some psychiatric treatment. After finishing her treatment, she withdrew consent for her child to be fostered by social services, but social workers flatly refused to return him to his mother and they put him straight back into foster care. Judge Gareth Jones had said that the authority needed to carry out an urgent review of its internal procedures, and he said that key personnel in positions of authority in social services and children's services needed to be fully informed by the legal department of the legal framework in which they operated. He said social services are not above the law. Like everybody else, it is subject to it. The judge said that Anglesey Council needed to demonstrate to the public that it is able to be competent once again to administer its local authority function without outside intervention. It had failed abysmally in the present case to demonstrate to the public that it could judge its functions in a proper manner. The son, the little boy, has now been returned to his mum, and lawyers are actually working on compensation for the family.
So there's some very interesting things on this. Mike, if you'll be kind enough just to pop that back on screen. If we have a look at this, the judge is blasting social workers and telling them they are not above the law. Am I alone in thinking that actually what he's saying is that they've actually broken the law? If he's had to remind them they're not above the law, they've done something. And so he suspects that proper procedures were not followed by the local authority. The word is that the local authority has broken the law. So when will we expect to see these social services people and people from the local council brought into court?
And if they're taking compensation against the council, then surely the people who'd ordered the child to be kept should be made accountable for that the council can have to, because it's going to come out of people are having cuts in that area everywhere, aren't they? And then the council, because of the mistake of the social workers.
Well, it's a mistake. Is it a mistake, or did they break the law? And of course, the other factor is here we have a so-called court hearing being held with no proper jury. And so a judge is just making up the law as he goes along that, well, they've just made a mistake, so we're not going to... So this highlights, I think, the danger that we see in Britain as Kenneth Clarke and other MPs push for more secret courts with simply a judge presiding to make a decision whether somebody is innocent or guilty. And we're going to follow this theme up, of course, with our own experience of now the government trying to regulate alternative media sites that are putting the news out, putting out truth about what's happening. We've got to get a clamp down on them. But let's just return to Scotland benefits.
OK. Apparently, unemployed people in Scotland have had their benefits penalised on 898,000 occasions. Citizens Advice in Scotland has urged for change as it's left increasing number of people without money for food and essentials, electricity, gas, etc. The Department of Work and Pensions have said sanctions were a last resort and people who are genuinely in need could apply for a hardship payment if someone disagrees with the decision about their claim. So this is
how do they
shocking.
Feed themselves in the making?
Well, they'll have to go to food banks, won't they? That's basically what it is. Sit at home, no money, have to go to food banks. I don't know how they'll be able to cook the food if they can't pay for their electric and gas, but that's the option.
Scotland now under Alex Salmond and his junta with Kenny McCaskill and of course Sir Stephen House, Senior Constable of Police Scotland. We've now got a pretty vicious state arising, so we don't care whether people can't feed themselves, we don't care if people haven't got the right benefits, we don't care if people are banged up in prison on no charges. Welcome to Life in Scotland 2014. And I'll just say that on the Jeff Rents show at 4 o'clock this morning UK column time, basically, the question was coming up, was independence for Scotland a good thing? And the reply that we gave was, of course, Alex Salmond is lying completely to the people of Scotland because he's not offering independence. He's offering Scotland as a vassal state under the control of the European Union. I
mean, it's frightening what's going on up in Scotland at the moment. What with every child having its own designated carer, now there's hardly any benefits going on. And then, so what does that mean for families there who haven't got enough money, haven't got jobs, and they're having their benefits penalised? Children are off, I take it.
Workhouses. That's probably where it goes next, is straight into workhouses. And of course, we're increasingly worried about the behaviour of the police. They seem to have found it amazingly difficult to apprehend Jimmy Savile in his career of abuse. But when it comes to actually controlling young children, well, this headline says it all, really.
Yeah, this Guardian is reporting that more than 1,000 children between the age of 10 and 4 have been stopped and searched by police in England and Wales over the last 5 years, according to figures from 22 police forces. More than 1 million under-18s were stopped and searched, and this figure makes up actually 28% of all stop and searches. So there we have the crime figures again. We've got to keep that in the back of our minds. But a police spokesman has said that it was necessary to stop and search under 10-year-olds as they could be used to conceal drugs or stolen goods.
Yeah,
so is this just this reason it is to boost up these crime figures that the police seem to be so obsessed with?
Well, it's perverse policy by the police, isn't it? Common sense has got out of the door as common purpose has come into the police policy making arena. What we see is more and more bizarre decisions. We can give another example here. This is to do with one of the Green Party Green Assembly members and working peer, Jenny Jones. She's spoken out because she discovered that the Met Police were keeping a file on her secret activities. And what had this lady done? Well, she'd actually supported a gentleman called John Catt. I believe he's 89. He's a lifelong campaigner and talented artist. And basically he was told by 3 senior Court of Appeal judges in 2013 that the file kept on his activities at legal peace protests between 2005 and 2009 were a violation of his human rights and should be deleted by the Met Police. Well, what are the Met Police doing? Very dangerous 89-year-old. I mean, he could be running his wheelchair at high speed.
Yeah.
He could be using his walking stick. Well, the Met Police are going to appeal the decision. And not only that, this lady found that because she'd signed a witness statement to be used in the trial, in the up-and-coming lawsuit, and had given her backing, that they'd labelled her as a domestic extremist And when she sent off for a subject access request, which cost her £10, she got 3 pages back from the police, which had, she said it was bizarre and pathetic. She wanted her money back. There were a few tweets that she'd made, a note that she was speaking at a demonstration in Trafalgar Square, and most of it came from public sources. So this lady says quite rightly, how on earth can this be used as intelligence? Well, we can imagine that if the police have got 3 pages on a lady supporting an 89-year-old campaigner, they've probably got 4 tomes on the UK column.
Yes.
And if that is the case, we'll be proud to pay our £10 to see whether we can have a copy of those books. But here we have the reality of life in Britain. The police who cannot apprehend violent, dangerous, prolific paedophiles such as Jimmy Savile.
Rolf Harris.
Well, Rolf Harris is another one, but has gone through the courts. And basically, what are we seeing? Well, the police have got time to keep files on people who show the remotest sign of challenging the state. So we're going to put this in context by talking about ATVOD, the Authority for On-Demand Television, and basically television on demand, to get that the right way round. Several of you are asking, how is it that we are back online? And the simple answer to that is because the key problem with ATVOD was the fact that we had videos posted on YouTube. Mike, would you just like to say a couple of words on that, since you've been front end with the dialogue with ATVOD?
Well, first of all, on demand means a video that you can watch at a time of your choosing, rather than what the broadcast media does, which is to play out television programs in a linear fashion. So you have no choice over when you watch them. Sorry, you only have a choice over whether you watch them or not. So on demand is any platform, according to ATVOD at least, where you can make a choice as to when and where you watch that video. So YouTube, they consider now, it seems, an on-demand platform, whereas we would argue that the intent of the original directive was for on-demand platforms like BBC iPlayer or Channel 4OD or 5OD, and platforms like that, which are separate from internet regulation. So that's what that's about. Look, clearly we cannot upload this video to YouTube later on today. So what I think we shall do is to make it available as a download link. I realized that the first time we tried that on Monday, we very quickly ran out of bandwidth. I think we've got a solution to that. So we'll make it available as a link for people to download, and then what people do with that afterwards is completely up to them. You may have your own YouTube channel that you feel it needs to go on, but that won't be anything to do with us, and we won't know where it might go. So just feel free to distribute it however you see fit. Mike,
can I just ask, is it going to be available for people to watch on the UK Column website, though?
No.
It won't be available either there?
No.
Right.
No.
Okay.
At this point, we can't do it. Until we get some clarity on where we are, we cannot provide our material as a video on demand.
But other people are able to download our things and put it up on their own channels and share it that way.
Well, I can't control what other people do with whatever we provide for download. So, yeah.
Thank you.
So if we focus in on ATVOD, and what better place to start than with a picture of Peter Johnson. Here he is, the chief executive. Of course, he's got a big smile on his face, and who wouldn't if you're earning £102,000 a year. So he's got a good job. And let's remember, ATVOD says it's out there to protect children. It's there to stop children seeing online pornography that isn't effectively protected by some sort of security or firewall for children. However, if you put in a number of relatively innocent words and click on Google Images, of course, what comes up in your face is a whole variety of hardcore pornography, which Peter Johnson and his team seem to have failed to discover. But let's have a look at the independent nature of ATVOD. Now, we did talk about this sitting on the seawall yesterday, but of course we can demonstrate today why these people are so frightened of the UK column, because if we do the analysis in a professional and video-based way, all becomes clear. So here's Mr. Johnson in the middle of the spider's net. And let's remember that he was former head of policy and business development at the British Board of Film Classification, the very people that, of course, have been passing more and more pornographic material to come out in the public domain. Well, sitting alongside him as a director of ATVOD, we have this gentleman, Ian McBride, and of course, as all the directors in ATVOD, other interests, many. Let's have a look at this one. This is Ian McBride, is also a director of the Media Compliance Group, and he's got two co-directors, Belinda Copland and Patrick Swaffer. So there's a picture of Mr. Swaffer. Media Compliance Group, of course, includes the good old BBC and its clients. Just remember that BBC link. Well, why are we interested? We're interested in this man because in October 2012, he just happened to be appointed as president of the British Board of Film Classification. But aside from that, he acts as a recorder in the Crown Court, and he also provides advice as a consultant to this firm of media solicitors, Goodman Derrick. This is a very big, powerful firm. And he's acting as a consultant to them. He's able to do that because formally he just happens to be their senior partner. Well, what have they been up to? They've been boasting that recently their media team have acted in the arrangements bringing together the BBC, Channel 4, ITV and Aguiva for the launch of Freeview's internet-connected TV service, provisionally known as Freeview Connect. So here we have the big boys ready to muscle in on-demand TV over the internet, and it would appear to us they certainly don't want any annoying little players such as the UK column getting in the way, but it's all independent. So here's Freeview, and we've got a collaboration of BBC, actually B-Sky B's in there as well, Channel 4, ITV, and they're looking to launch Freeview Connect. Now, they've used another company to put this together called Digital UK, and if we have a look at the directors, we've got Jonathan Thompson, just happens to be a former director of strategy at Ofcom, the very people that spawned ATVOD, the very people that are now attacking the UK column. And if that's not enough, of course, he's got a little bit of history with Channel 4 and I suspect a few friends in the industry. And alongside him, we've got Caroline Thompson, a lot of Johnson, Thompsons and Thompsons in this network, but I'm sure that they're not related. Caroline Thompson, former Chief Operating Officer, of the BBC, and also previous head of Corporate Affairs, Channel 4. But don't worry, because they are all independent. So, Media Compliance Group recommends that people might like to use Rights TV. And the bad news or the good news for the industry is that has been hoovered up by a huge media group called Compact Media Group. They boast 500 clients. And if we have a look at their Chief Operating Officer, David Johnson, 20 years of senior management, commercial and financial management in the industry, and a big expert with BBC online and digital TV.
Incredible.
Well, there it is in your face. And of course, the reason these people are so frightened of UK column is because we are putting the facts in front of people in a very clear and precise way. Yeah. So why should we be worried about ATVOD? Well, of course, ATVOD's own information says that they define what is TV like. They make it up on the hoof, but they're also responsible for regulating what they call hate speech. Who makes up the definition of hate speech? Well, it's none other than ATVOD themselves. And how do they do that? Well, they do it behind closed doors with people who are as independent as the snake's wedding we've just seen. So for people out there who've said to us it would only cost £100 to register with ATVOD, why would we want to register with an organisation which appears to have no democratic process, which states in its own material it wishes to make up its rules as it goes along, And then when it decides to fine somebody, it does it after a secret discussion with individuals with massive vested interest who have met behind closed doors. Our policy is we don't wish to join in this corrupted regulation system, and therefore we're going to do everything we can to make sure that the UK column stays outside it and maintains a free voice.
Yeah, exactly. Free voice, free speech, and we're not going to be silenced for anything that ACTFOD don't like us saying. Well, we're only talking truth.
We know that there are some people out there putting material out on the internet. Some of it is much more professional than we are doing. The quality of the presentation is better, the graphics is better. But we've got people saying, well, it doesn't really matter if you allow these people to regulate, because if you allow them to regulate you, you can then fight them later. Well, that doesn't sound good sense to me. No. And if we have a group of unknown people meeting behind closed doors to define hate speech, I think the UK is in a pretty perilous position.
Yep, agreed.
So, having mentioned the BBC, we'd like to say that UK column, the latest printed edition, was ahead of the game once again, warning what has been going on in the BBC, from child abuse to subversion. And we'll just give you a little clue here. We've got Chris Patten exiting chairman of the BBC Trust. And here was a little picture of a paedophile on his shoulder, which of course is Gill, the statue of Gill, a well-known paedophile, but the statue adorning the front face of Broadcasting House in London. And in the article, we also started to warn about the action of BBC Media Action, which we've called the Devil's Own Charity, and we'll come on to this in due course. But other people are beginning to pick up that something's wrong in the BBC, and we'd like to thank the person that sent us this article, taken bizarrely from BBC Radio 4, that in its own feedback programme, and you can listen to this yourself, it's still available, I think, for about another 4 days.
Is that on demand, Brian?
Oh my goodness.
Is it available on demand?
Well, it's some sort of demand because you pull it off the internet. I think we'll make a report to ACTFOD after the programme. But here we are. So if you go into this Radio 4 feedback session, Radio 4 is saying many people were complaining that BBC News failed to report the 50,000 people demonstrating in London a Saturday a couple of weeks back. So they actually asked their own news team to explain to them why the BBC had failed to cover it. Right. And nobody from the news team would actually speak to Radio 4. They simply got a press statement from BBC News given through to BBC Radio 4. And what did the press statement say? It said, well, basically there were many more important things going on, more important than 50,000 people demonstrating against austerity.
It started because there was actually outside Broadcasting House, the new Broadcasting House, all the journalists, a lot of the news journalists all appeared in a demonstration with tape over their mouth, complaining that they're being shut down on certain reporting. So I don't believe, maybe that article isn't quite true. I think the other journalists and people at the BBC were not allowed to speak and that they just had to use that official document. I'm only just surmising on this, I could be wrong, but the BBC failed to report that their own journalists were protesting outside Broadcasting House.
Well, there we are. We've got some hot off the press news, but what we're clearly seeing is that the BBC is conducting propaganda, not only in UK, and we're going to show you more of overseas, but of course when they're caught out in the blatant propaganda and bias in BBC's news, what can they do now? They've nowhere to run, so now we're just producing ridiculous press releases. So the BBC, propaganda and deceit, does it surprise us then we've had the problems with Jimmy Savile?
No, only today, links between Harris and Jimmy Savile have come out in the mainstream. Harris, who was yesterday found guilty of indecently assaulting 4 girls, he was convicted of 12 attacks between 1968 and 1986. And last week, Rolf Harris was named in a report which was looking into Jimmy Savile's visits to Broadmoor and it's come out that Harris had joined Savile on occasions at visits to Broadmoor, where the two would walk into women's wards whilst they were getting undressed. Harris apparently would ogle the women whilst they were undressing. One woman said that Harris and Savile would not come during the normal visiting hours, but just before bedtime when patients were getting undressed. I'm going to be doing a lot more on this later in the week after I've had a chat with Bill Maloney, and Harris is actually due to be sentenced on Friday, but apparently there are new allegations are now coming in as well. So he's due to be sentenced Friday, so we'll know more, and I'll have some more on this and what Bill's input's going to be, because obviously he's known about this for a while and been working heavily behind the scenes with witnesses.
And the other thing we better remind people about, of course, is Theresa May, at the moment Home Secretary, desperate to keep a lid on the exposure of the paedophiles in government. So despite, I think we've now got well over 100 MPs calling for a full investigation into child abuse, Theresa May is hiding in the shadows and refusing to support them. Why would a government minister attempt to defend paedophiles? I think there's only one answer to that. Well, let's return to the BBC, and we get another clue as to what the BBC is really about. And again, thank you to a viewer for sending us this. Hoskins versus Lawson, the climate debate the BBC wants to censor. The BBC has ruled that a radio debate about climate change involving former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Lord Lawson, should have been censored. Fraser Steele, head of the BBC Complaints Unit, said a Radio 4 Today programme about the causes of last winter's storms should never have been broadcast. And the reason they're saying it should never have been broadcast is because in the debate, the former Chancellor, Lord Lawson, was actually putting up some very good arguments challenging the whole concept of global warming, which of course was the BBC's agenda. Now we can push this one through even more strongly. You're right there?
Yeah, fine.
We can push this through more strongly because here is the Daily Mail. The article, BBC spends 500,000 to ask 33,000 Asians 5,000 miles from UK what they think of climate change. Corporation Savage for astonishing campaign survey on global warming. The BBC is under fire. Taxpayers' money used to ask the 33,000 people. More than 500,000 spent by little-known BBC Media Action for the survey. So we say it's remarkable that a few weeks after the UK column publishes with a massive exposure of BBC Media Action, here is the Daily Mail reporting a little bit about what they're up to. So this is part of Media Action's website. Remember, this is a charity. It claims to be independent of the BBC, yet it uses their office facilities and pension pot and has taken about £800,000 in value from the BBC, but they are independent. But what were they doing? Whose money were they spending? Well, of course, they weren't spending BBC money because the £519,000 for this study had actually come from the Department of International Development. And this is the document they produced. It's a policy briefing document changing the conversation about climate change. And what they've done is got amongst some of the most vulnerable people in the country. These are people, in the world. These are people having trouble feeding themselves and surviving on a day-to-day basis. And the BBC has sent teams amongst these highly vulnerable people to ask them about their beliefs on climate change with the intention of making sure they have the right beliefs. And of course, whose beliefs do these people need to believe? Well, of course, it comes down to the United Nations and their climate change. So what we've got is a little-known BBC charity pumping out pure government policy, and what this is actually doing is trying to reframe the minds of very vulnerable people worldwide. If you download a copy of the report, you can get this acknowledgement, which is right towards the end of the report. Note the authors are listed. I have absolutely no idea who these people are or what their credentials are. We'll look into that. But here's the statement. This policy briefing was prepared thanks to funding from the UK Department for International Development, which supports the policy and research work of BBC Media Action. So we have a BBC charity basically providing political policy in cahoots with the British government. If you're unhappy with this, then you might like to contact BBC Media Action direct. I'm sorry the text is a bit small, but if you freeze the screen, the number you need is 0208 008 0001, and you unusually can have the pleasure of speaking to a real person within the BBC. So if you're unhappy about this, BBC clearly acting in a political capacity to reframe people worldwide who don't believe in the myth of global warming, then you can get on and express your protest. Please be polite because it's much more effective. So what did the UK column have to say in our recent edition? Well, we put in a major article, BBC Media Action, Subversion from Broadcasting House to Kazakhstan. And here is the diagram showing that this, well, it isn't a charity, of course, at all. It's an arm of government. And here's the funding from the European Union, from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, from the US State Department, from the United Nations, from the Department for International Development, and of course, trustworthy, nice people like Bill and Melinda Gates there, 3.8 million.
I see there's 7% gift in kind. So the BBC have been given gifts of up to the value of 2.7 million, BBC Media Action.
Well, you have to have some sort of gifting in order to be able to claim it's a charity, but if you dig into it, of course, it isn't a charity.
But that'll be the office space, won't it?
The office space is actually worth £600,000 a year. The BBC just gives that for free to BBC Media Action. But if you read this UK column article, which we are going to make available to you on the UK column website, you will see how BBC Media Action openly boasts of operating in vulnerable countries, such as Syria, for example, in order to help wind up protest against the government. So it doesn't matter whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Somalia or Kenya, or indeed Ukraine, everywhere where there's been massive trouble and violence and deaths. If you dig into the background, BBC Media Action has been on the spot.
Someone in the chat room, Doberman in the chat room, has said, can the UK column not have a charity? Can we not work out to get a BBC, like have BBC, you've got Media Action, can we not create a UK column action charity?
At the moment, we are funded by donations. So in
that's the only way we're funded, yeah.
we can say we're acting. However, what form we should be in is under some consideration at the moment in view of the pretty vicious attack by ATVOD. So let's just summarise BBC Media Action. We would say it is amazing that anywhere there's a vulnerable country with destabilisation and violence, you're going to find two things involved: the British government aid, and BBC Media Action. So let's remind ourselves, they've been into Afghanistan, they've been into Iraq, they've been into Somalia, they've been into Syria, they've been into Palestine, they've been into Serbia, they've been into Ukraine, and here's Kazakhstan, where using the BBC Marshall Plan of the Mind, they ran a soap opera propaganda program in order to introduce the people of Kazakhstan to the capitalist democratic way of life. And of course, we won't forget Kenya with the violence and the manipulation of the press around the shopping mall massacre. It's incredible, isn't it?
Isn't it? Just all the countries where things are kicking off.
Yeah,
BBC Action have been there first.
Louise, it's only a coincidence that they're there.
Okay.
And another big thanks for this article, which we found extremely interesting. This was Fury at Creepy Network Experiment in 2012. Facebook carried out a little experiment on 700,000 people to see if it could change their emotions. And they worked with 2 American universities, and the aim was to see if they changed material that was posted in respect to Facebook sites, whether they could actually change people's emotions. So mixing algorithms and emotions. But this is the very interesting thing. The study was partly funded by the US government through the Army Research Office. So I'll just highlight that. There we are. There we are. Yeah, we need the US Army conducting research on 700,000 people to see if they can mess with their minds. And I think you've got a bit more from UK, Mike.
Yes, because, this is back in November last year. The Guardian published an article on the Cabinet Office's new policy lab. And just to quote a little bit here, it says, the new lab to be launched in December will work with departments on their toughest problems, drawing on design methods such as ethnography to shed new light on what services people really need and what a better solution might look like. Now, this is part of a wider movement spreading across the public sector. Service design thinking was at the heart of the government's digital services approach, and it was involved in the design of .gov.uk, the new government website, and that won a Design of the Year award last year. Now, that would have been last year. Yesterday, this little website was launched, and this is the iTeams website, which is coming straight out of Policy Labs initiative. I should say that the Policy Labs initiative is a Cabinet Office initiative, but it's also a global initiative. Of course, the initiative, the single project that they're most proud of is the Behavioural Insights team, which we've covered on many occasions on this programme. And this is what they say about themselves. The Policy Lab is practical. We aren't a strategy unit, but rather an experimental space, trying out new techniques and seeing what works. So what they're saying is that you and I are the lab rats. They are experimenting with policy on us to see what our reaction might be, just as Facebook has done on behalf of the US government. Just like ATFOD, they're making it up as they go along. So what tools are they using? Well, as already mentioned, they're using ethnography. So what's ethnography? Well, it's about following people and observing what they do to understand the experience of service users and inform the design of future services. And it sort of reminded me of the mouse and the maze, because they're bringing us into the maze. They're giving us the piece of cheese at the right moment and seeing what reaction they get. And of course, there's big data. So they say, we are also collaborative. So many of the problems faced by government, both short and long term, require joined up thinking. We know that most challenges don't sit neatly within departmental boundaries. So the lab provides a great way of doing things across government and outside. So here we've got a complete demolition of the separation of powers, and they work together. I suppose you might say they work together as a tight little clique of corruption. So that's the Policy Lab, and we are the lab rats.
But coming out of government, this is the key thing, Mike, isn't it? We're not talking about